All right, after this, I'm probably going to take a couple days off because my brain needs a rest after the last couple of days. Now we know for sure that there was storage in the bow of the boat. All right, so now at this point, I am pretty sure that the Triton was there all day. They didn't switch out the boats. And I'm also pretty certain at this point that this is a real video because there's one single frame where you can see Bart's boat and you can also see the toes of somebody like dangling them off the water. So if the picture or video were AI, it would be a really bizarre thing for it to just kind of throw in. But there's zero question in my mind that this video has been altered. So then the question becomes, why would they alter this video? And the only thing that logically makes sense to me is to alter the identity of the two girls. Because if Carter is the boy in red, Wyatt is the boy in the American shorts, Bart's brother Brooke being the one in the navy blue shorts, and then Ike being the one in the teal shorts. Then we've got Warren up here with somebody in this red striped swimsuit and the girl in the teal swimsuit with the backwards hat. So in this picture, this would be Brooks, this would be Ike, this would be Wyatt, this would be Warren, which would leave this to be Carter. Now, whoever this is seems to be very cuddly with Carter. Like, too cuddly, in my opinion, for it to be like a mother or a family member. Thinking about it a lot from the timeline that we have been told, and what we haven't really been factoring in again is the party. Because remember, Warren said he went to the party, but instead of talking with all of his friends, he went upstairs to go talk with his girlfriend's dad. Now, those families are tight. So if that dad of Ava, if that conversation with the dad didn't happen, then they would automatically know that they were lying. So I've been saying for a while that the girl was somehow involved. And mind you, everybody's back on land now. They're getting ready to do the fireworks and everybody's swimming and drinking still, blah, blah, blah. So what's the excuse for no pictures at that party? They've explained it all away during the day, but at this point, they're all just being teenagers and having fun again, right? So I'm thinking that the brunette girl is Ava, the girl whose house they went to. And she's pretty close with Warren and the Pyrone family.
And they're full speed running. And then after that, I didn't see them anymore. I think you were on the boat. You start from there?
Yeah, so after we planed off, Wyatt kept the boat pinned the whole way in. We ran into the mouth of Fort Bayou, where we came from originally. And we turned into Fort Bayou, went in the channel, ran probably 500, 600 yards into Fort Bayou. Wyatt had jumped out of the boat, put the plug back in the boat so access water. So water didn't keep pushing and filling back the boat.
According to their own words, they went into the mouth and then they turned and they went about 500-600 feet. Now, mind you, the party house is right around, but they go past it and then loop back around. However, Warren just admitted that at some point they had to stop and Wyatt jumped in. And even then, you heard him stuttering over the story. Like, it wasn't a smooth transition because I think they dropped her off. Which would explain why they would go back to this party, because obviously they can't cancel the party. That looks really suspicious. Then my theory has always been that the guys all like broke off and like talked to the parents about what was going on. And that's when they formulated their whole, we'll call her and then we'll call the Coast Guard plan. Remember, she is related. Somehow I can't figure out, but she is related through marriage to the lieutenant that wrote up the very initial report we've seen. Because remember how Morgan claimed that the picture of the boat stuff was circulating around Snapchat and stuff, even though Christine didn't post it to her Facebook page until the next day. Listen to this.
His mom was, what was he wearing? And so we were trying to remember what color his shorts were. We couldn't quite figure that out.
I said black.
Yeah, I think we said black.
I really did. He was wearing navy blue shorts?
Yeah, it was like dark blue shorts.
Dark. I just said black because I was trying to piece everything together and help out.
And so at this point, we're freaking out. We don't know where our friend's at. And the girl that took the picture, she was like, okay, well, I just took this picture of today. This is what color swim trunks he was wearing. And his mom asked for that to post on Facebook to say, if you've seen him, whatever, this is what he was wearing.
So remember, the girl who took the picture with the digital camera was on Wyatt's boat at the beginning of the day and then was there with them at night when they were having this discussion. So she had to have been there at the beginning and at the party at the very least. Then we remembered that the original shorts picture, well, that wasn't the color of his shorts, as we now know. So we also know for a fact that this picture did not get sent to Christine until July 5th, meaning that they had to have had that picture and then not sent it to her for hours. Because they also said this.
And so that's what we sent to her, or that's what she sent to her, because we were just trying.
So they corrected themselves. He said, we sent it. No, she sent it. But on July 5th, Christine said that they have been up for almost 48 hours straight, and then the very next post above it are the same pictures but better quality. Why did it take so long to get these pictures to them? Oh, and y'all, now that I said that, I realize, so all of these pictures had to come from the same digital camera, right? Meaning this picture did as well. And since I've already proven that this picture had used AI to do something weird because, there was no little bar here, only explanation for using AI on just this little part would be to obscure the reflection that was in this poll of the person who was taking the video. Or the pictures. Oh my God, yes. That makes sense. Love it when I figure that stuff out in real time for you on camera. So it makes sense to me that this photo video thing was altered to cover up this girl's swimsuit. Because let's face it, this swimsuit is the ugliest thing. It has supposedly sleeves and it's a tankini, but it goes in a weird cut, but it's ugly. It's ugly, and it's clearly not what these debutante beauty queen girls are wearing to a 4th of July beach party. So I'm 70% sure that this is Ava. Oh, wait. Oh my God. Wait a second. Shown y'all guys before that there's 4 boats out here in this little cluster, right? But I'm looking at these weird pink lumps and stuff at the front of the boat, Bart's boat here. Is that a pile of life vests? Because I'm realizing there's not 20, 30 people on all of these boats. I'm seeing 10, 12 people here tops. Let's not forget what a full house looks like on these boats. Because even in this video at the meetup place, there's not 20, 30 people getting ready to get on these boats. I mean, the boat left at 9:56, according to the GPS. We got 7, 8 people here, 6 people here. And also, if they were legitimately needing to be towed and they were trying to get the water to run off, why are they all spread out on the boat? Why are they on the boat in general? Why didn't they just get off on land or get on another boat? Trying to get the boat to tip up and go planing, why do you have over half the boat on the front of the boat? These are experienced fucking fishermen. They know better than that. Yeah, I can't believe I've never thought of that before. If the boat was sinking, why are they even on the fucking boat? Yeah, and if it was so common and so easy to get, rides back with other people, strangers on Horn Island, why did they need to load everybody on the boat? Or were they yelling at Nolan to get on the boat? They didn't need to get him on the boat. And now that I'm looking at this, doesn't it look like Warren is on the phone? Could this have been when he was calling his mom 8 times? Also, one more thing that stuck out to me.
We called law enforcement. I was with Wyatt at the time. After we left Jackson's house that night, I was with Wyatt, and one person we were with saw that their location was headed towards Wyatt's house. And so Wyatt got on the phone with 911 and was like, hey, these people are on the way to my house or already at my house. My mom and my dad are there alone, and they know nothing about this.
He stumbled over his words from beginning to end in that story, so I don't believe any of it. But the one thing that sticks out to me was the phrasing, they don't know anything about this. If people are heading over to your house, why wouldn't you call your mom and dad before you called 911? Because it sounded like he was trying to keep his parents out of the loop of this story, which as a teenage boy implies that you have something to hide. Just a lot of different things to think about, right?
Here's something interesting that I didn't realize, did you? That first of all, the judge was on the island, according to Warren.
You could.
If you want to sit there, if you're motivated enough to do it, yeah. I made a phone call to my mom, and I had to call her 8 times before she picked up because either her service was bad, she was on the back side of the aisle on the south side, or my service was bad, and it was just hard to get through.
She was on the island. That's very interesting. And here's another thing. This allegedly, on the ledge of allegedly, 911 call where they talk about going to the judge's house. Why would 911 get called to the judge's house? I don't know. What do you guys think?
We're en route to the judge's house. Wow. Negative. We're en route to the judge's house. Wow. You said you are en route to the judge's house or from the judge's house? En route to the judge's house.
Hey, I'm just here asking the questions, not accusing, not saying anything at all, but it is a little bit odd, especially after the judge texted Christine just saying, if and when you ever want to talk, here's my number. Why would she say if or when? Why would she say if? It's weird.
We have a new update regarding Nolan Wells, and I'm going to say it. It is a bombshell piece of information regarding the Nolan Wells investigation. Over the last couple of days, you've heard me say that the family is waiting for the district attorney to get in touch with them to schedule that joint investigation and cell phone extraction. We just found out on August 13th, which was literally just 2 days ago, that said District Attorney Mickelrath of the Jackson County, Mississippi, decided to send another letter to the family stating, you have 48 hours to drop off the cell phone. I'm sorry, is that the same thing as a joint investigation?
Somewhere on Horn Island, in the last hour anyone can account for, Nolan Wells was still alive. And somewhere between that hour and the phone call that told his mother he wasn't coming home, something happened that nobody on that boat has fully explained. 6 weeks later, there's a grand jury looking at this case. There's a phone that investigators still don't have in hand, and there's a mother who, instead of getting answers, is now being quietly scrutinized herself for the simple act of asking questions about her own son's last night alive. But if we're going to scrutinize somebody over that phone, let's actually ask all of it. What about the audio recording that's already been raised in this case? What about the fact that his phone and his keys were already sitting with someone else long before anybody called this a missing person investigation? And where's the dock footage? They released the footage of that boat leaving in the morning, so show us it coming back. If the camera happened to stop rolling the moment it mattered most, that's not evidence that went missing on its own. And right now, by his own description, the lawyer holding that phone has it under control, like there's something worth waiting out. A body decomposes. Evidence doesn't get more forgiving with time. So, what exactly is worth the wait? But before anyone puts that on a grieving mother, ask the bigger question. Why didn't law enforcement request that phone themselves, the very first week? Because 6 weeks ago, before the medical examiner had even completed an autopsy, somebody had already decided this was a drowning. You do not get to rule a manner of death before the person whose job it is to determine it has finished the work. If this had been treated as an active death investigation from hour one, the phone, the keys, the boat, all of it, belonged in law enforcement's hands that same week, not argued over on a television panel weeks later. That failure sits with whoever closed the door on this case before the science was even in. And now there's a new question nobody in an official capacity wants to answer on the record. Why is the district attorney's office backing out of what was supposed to be a joint investigation? And this week, a TikTok creator who's been picking this case apart, frame by frame, says she found something in the boat footage that changes who was actually out there that day. We're going to show you exactly what she's claiming, and we're going to hold it up against what's actually been said on the record, because there's a difference between a theory that makes you feel something and a fact that can hold up in a courtroom. Tonight, we're covering both, and we're not going to pretend they're the same thing. And stick with us all the way through, because buried in Nancy Grace's own panel is a detail almost nobody's talking about. A digital forensics expert laying out, on the record, exactly what investigators can already pull from Nolan's phone without ever holding the device itself, and exactly where that ends. Once you understand where that line actually sits, a few things about how slow this investigation has moved are going to hit very differently.
Bombshell tonight in the Nolan Wells investigation. Tonight, the timeline seemingly blows up. This as Nolan's mother is investigated. Why? And tonight, possibly even more important, where is Nolan's phone?
We have a new update regarding Nolan Wells, and I'm going to say it. It is a bombshell piece of information regarding the Nolan Wells investigation. Over the last couple of days, you've heard me say that the family is waiting for the district attorney to get in touch with them to schedule that joint investigation and cell phone extraction. We just found out on August 13th, which was literally just 2 days ago, that said District Attorney Mickelrath of the Jackson County, Mississippi, decided to send another letter to the family stating, you have 48 hours to drop off the cell phone. I'm sorry, is that the same thing as a joint investigation when the words are, you have 48 hours to drop off the cell phone, or you have 48 hours to, possess the cell phone for us? Is that the same thing as saying we're going to have a joint investigation? Don't you worry, I'm going to show you the letter right now. Here is the actual letter sent from A.R. Smith, the same attorney that sent out the letter on August 11th. I want to point your attention to right here. To date, Nolan's parents remain willing to facilitate an appropriate forensic examination of Nolan Wells' phone, including FBI involvement, according to our agreement on July 15th. However, your letter sent to Eric Hertz on August 12th at 12:51 p.m. set a deadline for Wednesday to deliver the phone to your office by August 14th at 9 a.m. This is not practical for a number of reasons. Now, that's a 2-page letter. I just showed you one of the excerpts. But the reason why it's not practical is 2 big reasons. And again, this is in that actual letter if you guys want to look it up. The first reason was that you agreed that there would be a joint investigation into the cell phone extraction investigation. But you're saying you need to drop the phone off at the office on August 14th at 9 a.m. That doesn't strike me as a joint investigation. That strikes me as, give us the phone, we'll go through it, and then we'll get back to you later. The second reason why it's impractical is because at the time, the Wells family was actually nowhere near Mississippi or nowhere near an area where they could actually drop it off and be compliant with that deadline. So those are the 2 main reasons why. Now, again, you guys can read the letter yourself. But this now makes sense. This is why the family is so concerned, and this is why the family is so upset. Because the DA now is essentially going back on what they said, saying, we want you to drop off the phone on August 14th, when on July 15th, they said, we will do a joint investigation together. This is why the Wells family is so frustrated with this investigation. And this is why they're trying to get the Department of Justice involved. This is why all the leadership are getting involved in this. Is because the family was under the expectation that the district attorney in Jackson County, Mississippi, was going to do a joint investigation based on the July 15th meeting. We just found out they may not want to do a joint investigation anymore. They're asking the Wells family to drop off the phone on August 14th at 9 a.m., which is already passed. But still, just drop off the phone. That's not the same as offering a joint investigation.
Before we get to what the internet thinks it found in a photograph, we need to talk about something a lot less dramatic and a lot more concrete: a phone. Because that's where this case actually took a sharp turn this week, on live television, in front of a national audience. On a recent broadcast of Nancy Grace's Crime Stories, the panel spent most of the hour on one question that sounds almost too simple to be the center of a death investigation. Where is Nolan Wells's phone, and why doesn't law enforcement have it yet? Here's what's not in dispute. Nolan's phone did not go home with Nolan. It ended up, by multiple accounts, back with the group of young men who'd been out on the water with him that day, and eventually made its way to his mother, Christine. What happened to that phone in the hours and days after? Whether anything was ever deleted from it, whether it was ever handed over for a full forensic extraction, is where every single guest on that panel started talking over each other. Attorney Tyler Cox, representing the young men who were on the boat, said flatly that there's no truth to any claim of missing texts or missing Snapchats, because, in his words, his clients had no reason to do anything with Nolan's phone other than give it back. Clean statement. Direct denial. Then former Officer Brandon Tatum, who's interviewed several of the young men personally, said something that landed very differently. According to him, the family's own attorney only said they were prepared to cooperate as of a specific date weeks ago, which, Tatum pointed out, is not the same sentence as, "we have cooperated." He called it troubling that a mother searching for the truth about her son wouldn't hand over the one device that could settle the question for good. Sit with that for a second, because it's worth sitting with. A mother is being asked, on national television, why she hasn't handed over her dead son's phone fast enough, while the young men who were the last ones with him are being defended for having no reason to touch it at all. Two different standards, applied to two different sides of the same tragedy, in the same 8 minutes of airtime. And it wasn't only the phone that came up. According to the same broadcast, the keys Nolan had with him that day never made their way back to his family either. They stayed with the group. Nobody on that panel had a clean answer for why a missing teenager's keys would end up anywhere other than back in his own family's hands the moment anyone realized something was wrong. A phone is easy to argue about because it's complicated. Passwords, cloud backups, forensic extraction. Keys are not complicated. Keys are simple, and simple is exactly what didn't happen here. Then there's the audio. There's a recording that's already been referenced publicly in connection with this case. A call placed that night. The kind of recording that either lines up with the timeline everyone's been given or doesn't. As of this broadcast, nobody on that panel would say plainly what's actually on it, who's listened to the whole thing, or why a recording that could settle a timeline dispute in minutes hasn't been laid out in full for the public, or, as far as anyone can confirm, for investigators. And then there's the footage. The boat leaving the dock that morning was filmed, and that footage has already made its way around. You've probably seen a version of it yourself. What hasn't surfaced anywhere, not once, is footage of that same boat coming back in. If a camera happened to be rolling when they left, the obvious question is whether one was rolling when they returned. And if the answer turns out to be no, that's not a technical glitch. That's a choice. And choices, in a case like this, are exactly what get asked about in front of a grand jury. And this is where it stops being a talking point and starts being something a forensics expert can actually answer. Because Nancy Grace didn't just let the lawyers argue about it. She brought in Heather Barnhart, a digital forensics expert with Cellebrite, the same technology used to pull evidence off Brian Kohberger's devices and off Alex Murdaugh's murdered son's phone. And what Barnhart said should matter more than anything the lawyers said, because it's not an opinion, it's how the technology actually works. Deleted photos on a phone don't just vanish, they sit in a recoverable folder for weeks. A Snapchat message that hasn't been opened yet lives on Snap's own servers for up to 30 days, and if law enforcement sends a legal request before it's gone, it can still be pulled. The digital trail doesn't disappear just because someone hits delete. Which means this isn't actually a mystery that has to stay unsolved. It's a question with a technical answer, sitting on a phone that, as of this broadcast, still hadn't been examined. Think about what that actually means for Christine Wells. Somewhere out there is a device that could tell her, in black and white, what her son's last hours looked like, who he was texting, what he was seeing, maybe even where he was standing when he sent his last message. And 6 weeks in, she still doesn't get to know. Not because the technology can't tell her, because nobody with the authority to demand that phone has demanded it yet. Do you think the delay in handing over the phone means something was deleted, or is this normal legal caution? Drop your vote below. So before a single TikTok theory enters this story, here's where things actually stand, confirmed, on the record. There is a grand jury looking at this case. The boat, as of this broadcast, had not been searched by cadaver dogs. The keys never made it back to the family. There's an audio recording that hasn't been laid out publicly in full. There's no footage of that boat returning to the dock, only footage of it leaving. And the phone that could answer the biggest open question in this entire investigation was still sitting untouched by forensic investigators. 6 weeks after a young man went out on the water and never came back. A grand jury isn't a formality, and it isn't for show. It's a room full of ordinary citizens, reviewing whatever evidence a prosecutor chooses to put in front of them, deciding whether there's enough here to bring formal charges against somebody. Nobody outside that room knows yet what's actually been presented, or who it's being presented about. But the fact that one exists at all tells you This stopped being treated as a simple accident a long time ago, no matter what the initial paperwork said. And the cadaver dogs matter more than people realize. A department doesn't bring in a cadaver-trained K9 to walk a boat everybody already agrees was empty when it came back to shore. That step gets taken when there's a reason to ask whether a boat is carrying a scent trail it shouldn't be. As of this broadcast, that step, small as it sounds, still hadn't happened. One of the most basic tools available to actually settle a question, instead of arguing about it on a television panel, was sitting on a shelf. Now, to be fair, and this show only works if we're fair to every side of it, that's not the whole picture. According to Tyler Cox, and confirmed on the same broadcast, the young men's side says they made the dogs available. They told civil rights attorney Benjamin Crump he was welcome to bring cadaver dogs out and search the Triton himself. Crump declined. And when you follow the actual legal logic instead of the headline, that decision holds up. A private attorney, no matter how well known, doesn't have the authority to order a scent dog search on somebody else's boat. That's a law enforcement function, period. Defense attorney Philip Dubé put it about as plainly as it can be put on live television. You cannot search someone else's property without the authority to do it, and only the agency with jurisdiction has that authority. So the boat sat unsearched, not because one side flatly refused, but because the one entity that actually has the legal power to order it, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, never did. Then there's the autopsy, and this one matters more than almost anything else in this story. 2 medical examiners have weighed in, and as of this broadcast, neither has given the public a determined cause of death. One is reportedly still waiting on toxicology. The other reportedly listed the death as undetermined, in part because there wasn't enough of the body left to fully examine by the time it was recovered. Read that twice. 6 weeks after Nolan went into the water, there is still no confirmed, official cause of death on record, which makes it worth asking how drowning became the working theory quickly enough to shape how this case was handled in its very first hours. And there's the question of who actually got tested and how. Several of the young men reportedly sat for something described as a computer voice stress analysis, not a polygraph. Different technology, different theory of deception, and by every account given on that broadcast, not admissible in court and not without real limitations. One of them, Warren, reportedly didn't sit for even that. Meanwhile, according to the same broadcast, the group's own phones, not Nolan's, theirs, were voluntarily handed over to the FBI. So phones did move toward federal investigators in this case, just not the one phone everybody actually needs answers from. That's the part of this story that's real, documented, and still unresolved. Every one of those threads, the phone, the keys, the tape, the missing return footage, the grand jury, the dogs that never got the call, the cause of death nobody's confirmed, was sitting there in plain sight before anyone on the internet ever opened a video editor. And then, 2 days ago, this stopped being an argument people were having on television and became something you can actually read for yourself. On August 13th, the Wells family's attorney received a letter from District Attorney McIlrath's office out of Jackson County, Mississippi. Not a check-in, not a scheduling email, a letter giving the family 48 hours to physically deliver Nolan's phone to the DA's office by 9 a.m. on August 14th. Walk through that timeline with me, because it's the whole story. Back on July 15th, according to the family's own attorney, there was an actual agreement in place, a joint investigation into the phone, with the FBI involved, both sides present for the extraction. That was the understanding the family says they'd been operating under for weeks. Then, on August 12th, at 12:51 in the afternoon, a letter went out setting a hard deadline less than 21 hours later, demanding the phone be dropped off at the DA's office alone. The family's attorney responded within a day, laying out plainly why that demand wasn't workable, starting with the fact that the family wasn't even in the state when the letter arrived, and ending with the point that should be obvious to anyone reading it. Drop the phone off at our office by 9 a.m. and joint investigation are not the same sentence. One is a partnership. The other is a handoff, followed by silence, followed by whatever the office decides to release once the phone is already behind their doors and nobody else is in the room. That's not a technicality. That's a documented, dated reversal, a real agreement in July, followed by a real ultimatum in August, in writing, from the exact office that's supposed to be running an impartial investigation into how a 19-year-old ended up dead. And it directly answers the question we opened this video with. Why is the district attorney's office backing out of a joint investigation? Because 2 days before this video went up, that's exactly what the paper trail shows happening, in real time, while a mother is still waiting to find out what's actually on her son's phone. Do you think the DA's 48-hour deadline was a legitimate move to secure evidence, or a bait-and-switch on the July agreement? Drop your vote below. Now here's where it gets darker. Because this week, before any of this letter had even surfaced, someone went looking at the actual boat footage from that day, frame by frame, and says she found something that nobody's been talking about.
All right, after this, I'm probably going to take a couple days off because my brain needs a rest after the last couple of days. Now we know for sure that there was storage in the bow of the boat. All right.
Before we get into this next part, one thing needs to be said plainly, because it matters more here than almost anywhere else in this story. Everything in this section is a theory, not a finding, not a confirmed fact. A theory, built by one creator, frame by frame, off publicly available photos and video. No forensic lab has verified it. No court has weighed it. We're going to show you exactly what she's claiming and exactly how she got there. And then we're going to tell you, honestly, what actually holds up and what doesn't. That's the deal we make with you every time we cover a case like this. And tonight is no different. Her theory starts with a single photo, the Triton, sitting at the dock, supposedly early on the day everyone went out to Horn Island. And she says something in that photo doesn't line up. Look closely, she argues, and there's a section near the front of the boat, right around a metal pole, that looks smoothed over. No visible seam where a shadow should fall. No consistent reflection where the water and the boat hull should be catching light the same way in every other frame. Her read is that a photo editing tool, possibly an AI-assisted one, was used to erase something that was originally reflected there, and her working guess is that whatever got erased was a person standing close enough to the camera that their reflection would have shown up in that pole. Now, here's where we have to slow down. Digital image artifacts happen constantly for reasons that have nothing to do with a cover-up. Compression, resaving a photo multiple times, a phone's own built-in smoothing filter, screenshotting a screenshot. None of that requires anyone to have doctored anything. Is it possible the image was edited? Sure. Is a slightly too smooth patch of pixels on a boat pole, by itself, proof that somebody erased a person from a crime scene photo? No. That's not how forensic image analysis works, and no actual digital forensics expert has looked at this photo on the record. So we're flagging her observation because it's specific and it's checkable, but we are not telling you it's proven because it isn't. What she does with that observation next is where it gets more speculative. She spends a long stretch of her video trying to match up who's in every boat photo from that day, cross-referencing swim trunk colors, hat styles, who's standing next to who, and she lands on one figure who keeps showing up at the edges of different photos, in a distinctive red and white striped swimsuit and a backwards baseball cap. Her theory is that this person was actually on the Triton itself, and that whoever altered the photo did it specifically to keep that person's presence quiet. Do you think there's something to the smoothed pixel photo theory, or is this reading too much into normal image compression? Drop your vote below. And this is where we have to be really careful and really direct with you. In her video, she goes further and puts a name to that swimsuit. She guesses, based on the outfit and who's standing near who in later photos, that it might be a specific young woman connected to the group, and she speculates about how close that person appeared to be with one of the boys. We're not going to repeat that guess here as if it's established, and honestly, we'd encourage you to think hard before repeating it yourself. Nobody has confirmed who that is. If she guessed wrong, that's a real person's name and reputation getting attached to a theory about a death investigation for no reason at all. That's exactly the kind of thing this channel tries not to do, and we're not going to do it just because someone else already did it first. What we can tell you, on the record, is something we already covered back in part 1. There is a documented, unknown female reference in the Jackson County Sheriff's Office report itself. Deputies wrote that several friends who'd been on the vessel with Nolan told them he was last seen in the company of a woman investigators haven't identified. That's not a TikTok theory. That's in the actual report. And several of the young men involved have publicly said, more than once, that they weren't on the same boat as Nolan that day, which raises a real, fair question that has nothing to do with photo pixels. If none of them were on that boat, who exactly gave police that account? Somebody stood in front of a deputy and said those words. 6 weeks later, there's still no name attached to it in anything that's been made public. The next thread she pulls on is the Coast Guard call, and this one's worth slowing down for too, because the wording actually matters here in a way that isn't speculative at all. According to her account of what Warren told Nolan's mother that first night, he said he knew somebody in the Coast Guard and that he was going to call them. Listen to that sentence again. I know someone in the Coast Guard and I'll call them is not the same sentence as I called the Coast Guard. One is a personal favor, the other is opening an official case file, and that distinction lines up with something we can actually confirm. The Coast Guard's own initial public statement said they weren't notified until 12:30 that morning, a statement that later quietly changed. Whether that first contact was a real emergency call or one teenager reaching a personal contact off the record is still an open question nobody involved has cleared up. That's not a theory. That's a documented gap between what was said happened and what the Coast Guard itself first said, on the record, about when they actually got involved. She also spends time on the boat's movements that night, the multiple stops, the detour back toward Fort Bayou instead of straight to the dock, a sea tow call that gets described as getting muted partway through, and a "we're untying now" moment on video that happens while, by her read, that call should still have been in progress. Some of that is genuinely worth a raised eyebrow. Some of it is also the kind of thing that happens naturally when a group of panicked teenagers are juggling a disabled boat, spotty cell service, and half a dozen different phone calls at once. We're not going to pretend every awkward pause in a chaotic night is evidence of a cover-up, but we're also not going to pretend a stumbling, inconsistent retelling of your own timeline, on camera, more than once, doesn't earn scrutiny. It does. That's just true of any account, in any case, from anybody. And then there's Katie. Every single account we have of Nolan's final hours on that island runs through her, secondhand, filtered through what other people say she told them, or what other people assumed happened between them. Not one word of it, in 6 weeks has come from her own mouth. No interview, no public statement, nothing. To be fair, there are legitimate, non-sinister reasons a family keeps a young woman out of the spotlight in a case like this. Lawyers advise silence constantly, for reasons that have nothing to do with guilt. Protecting someone from the exact kind of pile-on every other name in this case has already endured is a reasonable call, not an automatic red flag. We're not accusing her of anything, and you shouldn't either. But here's what's genuinely hard to get past. The person closest to Nolan's actual last hours. The one witness who could answer more of these open questions in a single conversation than every panel, every letter, and every frame-by-frame photo analysis combined, has never spoken publicly, in any format, anywhere. That's not a rumor. That's not a theory. That's a real, documented hole sitting in the exact center of this timeline, and it's been there since day one. Do you think Katie should be expected to speak publicly, or is staying silent the right call for her? Drop your vote below. So here's where that leaves us, honestly. A photo with a smoothed-over patch that might mean nothing and might mean something. A Call the Coast Guard story that doesn't hold up word for word against the Coast Guard's own timeline. An unnamed woman in an actual police report that nobody has explained, and one witness who could clear up more of this in a single sentence than anyone else in this case, who still hasn't said a word. We're not calling this solved. Nobody honest would, but we're also not done, because there's one more piece of this that hasn't made it into any panel, any letter, or any TikTok video yet, and it might be the part that finally makes all these other threads make sense.
Here's something interesting that I didn't realize, did you? That first of all, the judge was on the island, according to Warren.
You could. If you want to sit there, if you're motivated enough to do it, yeah. Like, I made a phone call to my mom, and I had to call her like 8 times before she picked up.
Same rule as last time. Everything in this section is his read on a detail, not a finding, and we're going to tell you exactly where the line is between what's actually in the clip and what's his interpretation of it. Before we get into what he found, it's worth explaining why an unaccounted-for adult even matters in a case like this, because on its face, it can sound like a small thing to hang a whole segment on. It isn't. In any death investigation, investigators build what's called a timeline of last known movements. Who was where, with who, at what time, confirmed by more than one source. It's not about suspicion. It's about narrowing down the truth until there's nowhere left for a story to slip. Every adult who was actually present that day is a data point in that timeline. Leave one out, whether by accident or on purpose, and the whole picture stays blurrier than it needs to be. That's the frame he's working from, whether he says it in those words or not. He starts this part of his video by going back to something small, something that had already been said publicly, weeks earlier, and mostly passed by without much notice. Warren, in his own interview, describing why it took so long to reach his mother that night, says he tried calling her 8 times before she picked up, because her service was bad. She was, in his words, on the back side of the island, on the south side. That's it. That's the whole clip. But his read on it is this. If Warren's mother was on the island that day, then the roster of who was actually out there, the one everyone's been working off for 6 weeks, is missing at least one adult. Nobody's disputing Warren said it. The question he's raising is simpler than people give him credit for. Why has this detail never come up anywhere else, in any other interview, from any other person who was supposedly there? And here's where it's worth pulling in something Warren himself said, in a different part of the same round of interviews, because it doesn't quite sit next to the 8 calls story the way you'd want it to. In one account, he describes cell service on Horn Island as basically fine. A little off the island, you have cell coverage, And, in his words, he called his mother while they were out there, and it was fine. In another account, the same phone call becomes 8 attempts, bad service, a struggle to get through. Those are 2 different descriptions of the exact same kind of call from the exact same person, and they don't match. Maybe there's a simple explanation: different moments, different spots on the water, service that comes and goes the way it actually does near open water. That happens. But it's also exactly the kind of inconsistency that, in any other case, would get flagged as worth clarifying, not waved off because we like the person telling it. 2 different descriptions of the same phone call. Normal inconsistency or worth a follow-up question. Drop your vote below. Then he connects it to a second detail, a reference in what he describes as a 911 call to a group heading toward the judge's house that night. And he asks plainly, on camera, why would a 911 call reference somebody's house that isn't the address of the person who's missing, or the address of the boat, or the address anyone's actually explained? Why the judge's house, specifically, and who is the judge to this story? This is also a good place to slow down and connect it to something we already told you about back in the hook in part 1, because it might not be the same call at all, and figuring out whether it is or isn't actually matters. Separately, in the boy's own account of that night, Wyatt is the one described as calling 911, not about Nolan being missing, but because a group of people, tracking a phone's location, appeared to be headed toward his own house, and he wanted police there before they arrived. That's a documented call, described by more than one of the boys in their own words. Is that the same 911 reference he's pointing to when he says, the judge's house, just remembered or mislabeled differently by different people? Or is it a second, separate call that hasn't been publicly accounted for at all? We genuinely don't know, and neither does he. But it's a real question, and it's the kind of thing that a single page of dispatch logs would settle in about 5 minutes, if anyone released them. And the third piece is a text message he says was sent to Christine from that same person that reads roughly, "If and when you ever want to talk, here's my number." He lingers on that phrasing, specifically the word if, not when you're ready, not whenever you want, if, as in maybe never. To him, that's not the way you'd expect someone close to the family, sitting on relevant information, to reach out to a mother in the middle of the worst weeks of her life. Does if and when you ever want to talk sound like odd phrasing to you, or is this reading too much into a text message? Drop your vote below. We want to be fair to the other reading of that same text too, because it exists and it deserves airtime. Grief makes people say strange, clipped, overly careful things to each other. So does guilt, sometimes. So does simple awkwardness, not knowing what to say to a mother whose son just died, and reaching for language that keeps the door open without demanding anything of her. If and when could be somebody protecting Christine's space to grieve on her own terms. It could also be somebody keeping their distance on purpose. Both readings fit the same 4 words. That's exactly why a single text message, on its own, was never going to be the thing that cracks this case open, and why it's worth exactly what it is. One more odd detail in a story that has accumulated a lot of them. To his credit, he's careful about how he frames all 3 of these. He says it himself, on camera. I'm just here asking the questions, not accusing, not saying anything at all. And that's actually the right instinct, even if the internet doesn't always follow his lead on it. It's also worth being honest about the other side of that phrase, because "I'm just asking questions" is a line that can do 2 very different jobs. Sometimes it's genuine caution, a way of surfacing something real without overstating what it proves. Other times, in true crime content generally, It's a way of putting an accusation into the world while keeping enough distance to say you never actually made one. We're not telling you which one this is. We're telling you that both exist, and that it's on us, and on you, to hold the line between them, not just on his behalf, but on ours too, every time we cover a case like this one. Because here's where we have to be straight with you, the same way we were in part 2. An adult being somewhere on an island where teenagers are gathered is not, on its own, evidence of anything. A 911 call referencing a house is not the same as that house being a crime scene, and one slightly clinical text message is not proof of guilt. Plenty of people are just bad at texting during a crisis, including people with nothing to hide. 3 odd details, taken together, earn a question. They don't earn a verdict, and we're not going to hand you one we don't actually have. What they do earn is the same thing every other thread in this story has earned: a name, a timeline, and an on-the-record explanation, none of which currently exist. If there's an adult who was on that island and hasn't been accounted for anywhere in 6 weeks of interviews, that's a gap in the story, regardless of who he turns out to be. Gaps get filled by facts, not by a comment section. And speaking of the comment section, it's worth being honest with you about how far this has already run without them. Ask people watching this case who that unnamed adult actually is, and you'll get several confident, completely contradictory answers. Some say it's Nolan's mother. Some say a stepmother. Some throw out other names entirely. Every one of those answers is somebody guessing. None of them is confirmed. We're telling you that not to add another guess to the pile, but because it's the clearest evidence yet of exactly the problem this whole video keeps circling back to. 6 weeks of silence from the people who could just answer the question, filled in by whoever's willing to guess loudest. And the frustrating part is how easy this particular gap would be to close, compared to almost everything else in this case. This isn't a forensic extraction that takes weeks and a court order. This is dispatch logs, a matter of public record in most jurisdictions, showing exactly what address a 911 call referenced and exactly when it came in. It's phone records, the kind that get pulled in ordinary cases every single day, showing who called who, from where, at what time, cross-referenced against cell tower pings that can place a phone within a few hundred yards. None of that requires anyone to hand over a password or unlock a device. It requires an investigator picking up that specific thread and pulling it all the way through, instead of letting it sit next to everything else that's gone unanswered for 6 weeks. And underneath all of it is still just a mother, sitting with a version of events that keeps growing new edges every time somebody rewatches an old interview closely enough. Christine didn't ask for a stranger's frame-by-frame photo analysis to become part of how her son's death gets discussed. She didn't ask for a text message she received in private to end up dissected in a comment section by people who will never meet her. What she asked for, from the very first phone call, was simple: where is my son? 6 weeks later, buried somewhere underneath a grand jury, a DA's ultimatum letter, a disputed photograph, and now an unaccounted-for adult on an island. That's still the only question that actually matters. Everything else in this video exists because that one question hasn't been answered yet. So here's where 3 parts into this story actually leaves us. A phone that's still not in investigators' hands. A DA's office that agreed to a joint investigation in July and sent a 48-hour ultimatum in August. A photo with a smoothed-over patch nobody's forensically confirmed means anything. An unnamed woman sitting in an actual sheriff's report. And now, an adult present on that island, by Warren's own account, who nobody's named, explained, or asked about on the record. We're not going to manufacture certainty we don't have. What we can tell you is that every one of these threads points at the same 2 things: a family that still doesn't have the answers it's owed, and an investigation that has had 6 weeks to close these gaps and hasn't. Until that changes, we'll keep pulling on every thread that's actually there, and leaving alone the ones that are just guesses wearing a headline.
That were on the boat that day. Officer Tatum, thank you for being with us. Let me talk about this one moment. We've got so much to get to. I'm going to try to be brief. Tyler Cox stating, I don't think they cooperated at all. I think he's talking about Nolan's family. They, I guess the sheriff's office, haven't had access to Nolan's phone. Well, can't they subpoena that? It's called a subpoena ducis tecum. You're familiar with those. You've testified in court. A subpoena ducis tecum is, we hear about subpoenas for testimony. I've been subpoenaed. Yes, go to court and tell the truth. A subpoena ducis tecum is for an item, an object, a document. The sheriff can give out a subpoena ducis tecum or get a warrant for an object. So, you don't have it? Fine, get it. Next. So, how can you say, I'm quoting, how can you say there's no text message or photo, as a text message or photos missing? Our boys had no reason to do anything with Nolan's phone other than give it back. So seeing anything about missing texts or Snapchats completely false. Well, according to the mom, Officer Tatum, she says that there was nothing sent out while Nolan was at Horn Island, which she found very odd. I have no reason to disbelieve her. So how can you say there were missing or there weren't missing? I don't think you can say it either way. Why don't they just get a search warrant and go get the phone? You know what? Forget all that. Officer Tatum, where is Nolan's phone? Do authorities have it?
Well, from my understanding, authorities do not have it, and the family have not been cooperating with authorities to give the phone over. According to the testimony or written statement from the lawyer that represents the family, the Nolan Wells family, he had made mention that he's prepared to cooperate, but they have not cooperated yet, which is very interesting to me. You want to find out what happened to your son. You would think you will be doing everything you can to cooperate. I can't judge her. I don't know what's in their mind, but it just seems to be very off-putting for them not to at least give the phone over and do what exactly they told the world they were going to do. And that is to allow a forensic extraction of his phone. Therefore, the world can see if there is things that have been deleted. I think Tyler Cox is very clear about what he's saying, that the boys had nothing to do with it. So if there is anything missing from the phone, it had nothing to do with them. Now, I'll add this. When you look at what Christine said.
Brandon, whoa, I'm going to go right back to what you're saying, but you're saying a lot, and I want to address each thing so we don't leave anything out. Number one, you just stated that, basically. Correct me, you can paraphrase this any way you want to. It looks really bad for Nolan's family not to hand over the phone. Do you have any independent knowledge they have not handed over the phone?
According to their lawyer that wrote a statement, and the statement was, we're prepared to cooperate, but that was as of the 11th. Therefore, they have not cooperated. Tyler Cox has made mention that he don't believe they cooperated whatsoever. He don't believe they cooperated whatsoever as well. So
extrapolating. You're taking the words, Tatum, that their words that they're prepared to cooperate to mean they haven't handed over the phone. Isn't that true?
I'm putting everything together, right? We have Tyler Cox that's coming out and saying that he has no indication whatsoever they've cooperated. The family has not come out and said that there's any findings. And then also the attorney that represents the family is saying that we haven't sent or gave the phone over, but we're willing to. And that was as of the 11th.
No,
so it appears that there's no indication that.
Brandon, you may very well be a lot smarter than me, but I can hear. Okay. The statement was, we're prepared to cooperate, I guess from Crump. That does
I'm not
not
sure
mean
if it was.
We have not handed over the phone, but we will.
Well, Nancy, when you put it all, you have to put the totality of circumstance together. I'm not there to be in the room with the investigators to determine, but I'm just going off of what knowledge we have and that's been given to us that's available. And what Tyler Cox is saying, and I'm taking him at his word, he's saying that there's no indication that they've cooperated. The lawyers that represent the family is saying we're prepared, but they did not say that they cooperated whatsoever. So I'm looking at the statements that are produced, and all of the statements indicate that there has not been a cooperation with the phone being extracted from investigators. Therefore, there is no true determination that things were missing from the phone. Well, I mean, we have no other. We have no other. We have nothing else to go off of.
We're prepared to cooperate. For all I know, that means we'll come in for questioning. We'll let you search his belongings. It
Nancy,
can mean anything. That does not equal we have not handed over the phone. But hey, you know what?
Nancy, it's been weeks.
You say tomato, I say tomato, because it kind of doesn't matter, and I'll tell you why it doesn't matter. Actually, I'll let an expert tell us why it doesn't matter. To Heather Barnhart joining us, digital forensics expert with Celebrite. We learned all about Celebrite during the Alex Murdaugh trial. That's how we got everything off of his dead, murdered son's phone. And the SANS Institute, SANS. She is one of the preeminent digital forensic experts in the country. She helped crack the Brian Kohberger case, and she is co-author of Practical Mobile Forensics, now in its 4th edition. That means that many people have used it. Heather, thank you for being with us. If the phone, I don't care where it is. Okay, actually, I do care where it is. I want to know that it's been handed over. I don't have to have the phone to know what's on the phone if it's in the cloud. It looks like an iPhone to me. So my argument with Officer Tatum is academic. It doesn't matter if I can get it from the cloud. So Nolan's phone missing. So what? I can download it. I can get it.
Data will exist in the cloud if he's syncing to iCloud and third-party applications. However, having physical access to the phone is where the databases exist that will have the truth on deletion. So you really need to get a full file system extraction of his phone as quickly as possible. So if it's not handed over to authorities now, it needs to be, because this was over a month ago now.
Do you have to have the phone to do the extraction? What about the cloud?
Cloud data is different, and there's a lot of information there. There could be unique information in the cloud that's been removed from the phone, if anything was removed, but it's best to have both cloud and the phone to paint the entire pattern of behavior and to see the truth.
We've spent 3 parts on what people are claiming. This part is different. This part is about how any of this actually gets proven, one way or the other. Because underneath every theory we've covered tonight, there's a real, unglamorous process that either happens or doesn't. So let's slow all the way down and walk through it, step by step, the way an investigator actually would. How digital forensics actually works. When Nancy Grace brought in Heather Barnhart, she wasn't bringing on just another talking head. Barnhart works with Celebrite, the same extraction technology used to pull evidence off Brian Kohberger's devices and off the phone belonging to Alex Murdaugh's murdered son. She's co-authored the field's standard reference text, now in its 4th edition. When someone with that background tells you how phone forensics actually works, that's not opinion. That's the floor of what's technically true, and it's worth understanding for yourself instead of just taking anyone's word for it, hers, ours, or anyone else's. Here's the floor. A phone syncs data to the cloud, photos, messages, app activity, as long as it's connected to iCloud or a similar service. If law enforcement wants that data, they can often get a version of it without ever touching the physical device, through a legal request to the cloud provider. That's real, and it's useful. But it's not the whole picture, and this is the part that actually matters for this case. The physical phone holds something the cloud doesn't, the device's own internal databases. The ones that record not just what's on the phone right now, but the history of what used to be there and when it was removed. If you want to know whether something was deleted and when, And by whom, you need the phone itself, not just what's synced off of it. Cloud data and phone data tell you different parts of the same story. You need both to see the whole thing. That's not a talking point. That's how the technology is built. And it's why the cloud has it, so who cares if we have the phone? An argument that came up more than once in this case doesn't actually hold up under its own logic. The cloud might have a copy. It won't have the deletion history. Only the device does. Why a missing phone isn't automatically suspicious, and why it isn't automatically nothing either. One of the sharper exchanges in this whole case was over a simple premise. Teenagers don't separate from their phones. Officer Tatum raised it, and Nancy Grace pushed back on it with her own example. Swimming with her kids, her phone stayed on the boat, and she made sure it came back with her when she did. Neither one of them is wrong, exactly. Phones get left behind on boats constantly, for completely mundane reasons. Dead battery, somebody grabs the wrong bag, a group splits across multiple boats, and it just doesn't make the trip back with the right person. According to the boy's account, Nolan wasn't even the only person who left a phone behind that day. That's a real, ordinary explanation, and it deserves to be treated as one. But ordinary explanations exist is not the same sentence as, therefore nothing needs to be checked. The honest, detective brain answer here is, a phone getting left behind is common. A phone that then sits with someone else's family for weeks, without ever being handed to the one agency that could actually settle every question about it with a forensic extraction. That's the part that isn't ordinary. The leaving it behind is boring. The 6 weeks after is not. Which part actually bothers you more? That the phone was left on the boat, or that it still hasn't been forensically examined 6 weeks later? Drop your vote below. How a boat search actually gets authorized. This is the part almost nobody explains clearly, and it's worth getting right, because a huge amount of the online anger in this case is aimed in the wrong direction over it. Cadaver dogs were, according to this broadcast, made available to attorney Benjamin Crump by the young men's side, an offer to bring dogs out and search the Triton. Crump didn't take them up on it, and the reason isn't complicated once a lawyer actually explains it. Defense attorney Philip Dubett laid out, plainly, that a private citizen, even a nationally known civil rights attorney representing a grieving family, cannot authorize a search of somebody else's property. Not legally. Not procedurally. That's not his call to make, and it was never going to be, regardless of who offered what to whom. Only the agency with jurisdiction, in this case, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, has the legal authority to bring in a cadaver dog and have that search mean anything if it ever needed to hold up in a courtroom. So here's the detective-level version of what actually happened with the boat. An offer was made. It wasn't accepted, because accepting it wouldn't have been legally meaningful even if it had been. And the one entity that could have made it meaningful, law enforcement, never did it themselves. That's not a gotcha against either side. It's a structural gap in how this investigation has been run, and it's still open. How a medical examiner actually determines drowning, and why drowned doesn't automatically mean accident. This is maybe the most genuinely educational thread in the whole case, and it comes from forensic pathologist Joe Scott Morgan, who's conducted over 10,000 death investigations. Here's what he explained, in plain terms. Drowning isn't always a standalone cause of death. Someone can sustain a head injury, lose consciousness, fall into water, and drown, meaning the drowning is real, but it's not the whole story, and it's not necessarily an accident. Medical examiners look at specific physical evidence to reconstruct what happened, the lungs, to assess water intake, the inner ear, which is one of the areas most telling in a drowning case, and the brain, which can show swelling under certain circumstances. It's not one test. It's a pattern, built from multiple points of physical evidence, and it takes time to do right. Which is exactly why the current state of this case, an autopsy reportedly complete, but no publicly released cause of death, and a second examiner who reportedly couldn't fully complete an assessment because there wasn't enough of the body left to examine, actually matters as much as any theory about a photo or a text message. The single most important forensic fact in this entire case, the one thing that would either close off or open up almost every other question, is a cause of death that still hasn't been made public. Everything else, the phone, the boat, the keys, the tape, the unnamed adult on the island, is investigators and internet sleuths alike working around a hole in the middle of the case that only a medical examiner's report can actually fill. So if you take nothing else from this deep dive, take this. None of what we've covered across 4 parts is unsolvable. Every single thread has an actual, known process that resolves it. A forensic extraction resolves the phone. A properly authorized search resolves the boat. A completed and released autopsy resolves the cause of death. None of it requires guessing. It requires someone with the authority to do it, actually doing it. 6 weeks in, that's still the part missing. Not evidence, not theories, not clips to argue over. Just somebody finishing the job.